Welcome to the K2 Sales Podcast. I'm your host, Karen Kelly. Every week I'll be sitting down with a sales executive where they'll share their stories and experiences that produce game-changing results. Let's be honest, sales can be a tough game. I'm sure at some point we've all delivered a less than stellar demo, been ghosted by a client or two, and sometimes maybe we did more talking than listening. And that's where I can help. The stories and insights our guests share can be applied to your own business, your territory, or with your team, so you're not reinventing the wheel. Our weekly tactics and strategies help you get out of your head and start creating your own path towards game-changing results. Welcome back to the K2 Sales Podcast. I'm your host, Karen Kelly. Now, many sales professionals and sales leaders we're Zoom fatigued. Our customers are Zoom fatigued, but we have to keep going. Face-to-face is starting to happen a little bit, but I don't think it's going to be fully the way it was before the pandemic. So how can we embrace the technology? But more importantly, how can we harness our emotions, our energy, our storytelling to connect with our audience and create an experience, a virtual experience that's going to get them to, lean into what we're selling, to have a more meaningful, deeper conversation. And I'm excited to be speaking with today Robbie Crabtree. Robbie Crabtree was a formal trial lawyer. He coaches the mock trial team at SMU Law School, and he's now the founder of Performative Speaking. So what he does is he's leveraged his successes in the courtroom with really capturing the emotion in storytelling, moving his audience. Obviously, the stakes are a lot higher in the courtroom than they are in sales, but really understanding how can we tell a story, paint a picture in our buyer's eyes that allows them to see themselves in it, elicit the emotion. What do we want them to feel? How do we want them to leave our call? And we can do that with storytelling. So Robbie is going to share in our conversation, when to storytell. Like if we do it too early, what's the risk of that? What does a good story look like? How can we disarm our audience and really start building trust? If you're a sales leader, how can you do the same thing with your team? So really, share some of your past failures to connect with your audience, to show them that you are human and to be relatable. So we can use this both internally and externally and really lean into the emotion. People buy an emotion, but also, make it a little bit fun. Sales should be fun. And the energy you bring and what's the feel, the look and feel of the call. And think about, calls you've been on as a customer or a prospect. And you think, God, this is boring. This is dull. I don't want to be that person. So that's a great mirror as to what not to do on a sales call. But Robbie just brings a lot of great tactical ways to use storytelling to move your audience, to motivate them to action is what we want. I hope you enjoy the podcast. I had a great conversation. I learned a lot as well. So enjoy. In your experience as a trial lawyer and now as the CEO of Performative Speaking, what kind of suggestions would you say just as that starting point of just connecting with their audience and just being different, like trying to, from the get-go, get their attention?
I mean, one thing to first acknowledge here, Karen, and thanks for having me. This is exciting to get to chat with you about all of this. But if Zoom is the new medium, is like the new way that we're playing the game, it's the rules, that means there's tons of opportunity because so many people are approaching it with, well, this technology creates this barrier between us, and I've just got to continue to do my job. Whereas it's going to open up, the people who do this really well are going to excel, right? There's always that idea that, chaos is a ladder. And the truth is, there's never been a better time to go up that ladder as a salesperson than right now, because you can start to do interesting things over these mediums. So when it comes to Zoom, you get on this call and right away, a lot of people get on the call and it's very just dry and boring. That's one thing that I see time and time again with a lot of sales reps. And the truth is, you need to bring an energy. You should get on and you should be happy to be there. It shouldn't be you're chilling in your pajamas, laying on the couch, taking this call. It should be right now, you're set up in a great setup. My setup is not ideal, but I'm traveling a little bit. So it's a little bit worse than I would do if I was actually on a bunch of sales calls. But it's that intentionality behind how do we present ourselves in that first moment? Because now we're not showing up in the suit and tie, but we're showing up on our Zoom screen. So how's our background? How's our lighting? How's our audio? How are all these pieces? And you should be testing it before you ever get on there. Easy way to stand out. And then when you go in, bring that energy. And as you work through this process, we're going to talk about this a little bit more, But you want to start early on. Like, you've got to identify, do they have a problem and can you solve it? So you've got to get some information from them. But then we want to start really weaving in stories and make it engaging and bring out your personality as a salesperson, because at the end of the day, we know this. People buy from people. And so if you can show them you're a person that they know, like, and trust, that's how you close the deal.
Yeah, that's great. And I think you're right. It's the belief in, oh, this is difficult versus those that are see it as an opportunity to really lean into, how can I be a game changer? How can I really maximize, sharing my screen and playing around with things to create an experience and stand out to your customers, right? So I just think it's those who can be victims and those who see it as, a victor. So great points there. So when you say, the salespeople are boring and dry, and some salespeople, may not have a great, exciting background. So what kind of stories or examples are even appropriate to bring in? Like, what should they be looking at to draw upon? Is it, their audience? Is it just a generic story that's really, cool about them? Or where do you think that initial thought process should start about what stories should I bring into my engagements?
So I think, to begin with, what you actually need to be doing is live a life that's interesting enough that you're creating stories. I mean, first off, let's just get to it. It's going to sound harsh, but if you're living a boring life, you're going to come across as a boring person, because the truth is you are. And that's not to be mean, but like, go out and do some stuff that makes you engaging and appealing to people. So that's kind of step one. Step two is, once you've done that, some of this comes down to preparation. You've got to identify, what are good stories? What are good stories you've lived? What are good stories you've heard from clients or other people? Maybe they're friends, they're fellow salespeople who have told you great stories. Guess what? You can share those. You can use those to connect to an audience. And you can also just use, like, generic parable type stories, right? The man fell into a hole, and a priest walked by, a doctor walked by, and finally a friend walked by. There's that story. Or the man who's fishing and somebody says, hey, like, why don't you build a bigger fishing empire and all this? Like, there are these generic stories we can pull on that I use all the time, even though they're not mine. They're not real stories. They're just parables. But when it comes to your real stories, when you're going in, it's just a piece of prospecting, right? Like, we know who we're going to be talking to. We know what our goal is. It's either to get the next meeting, it's to get the sale, whatever that case is. So how do we think about setting up those moments that we know, when they say this triggers me to talk about this story? When they say, I've got this problem, it reminds me of a client I worked with who also had something similar, and here's how this played out for him, right? Or, for myself, I can use stories when someone's like, yeah, I really struggled to come up with the right words to say, and I'm trying to sell them on, like, you should take my program. I can say the same thing. Guess what? I grew up with a stutter. I grew up hating the sound of my voice. I totally understand where you're coming from. And you tell this story of transformation so they can see it themselves. That's how I think we have to think about it, is that prospecting preparation phase is what allows us to be successful in the actual call itself. Stories are a part of that.
I love that. And first, I would agree. Live a great life. Forget everything else. If you live an unapologetic, cool life, you have a lot of stories to share. So that's step one. I love what you said there, and just what came to mind as you're saying that, Robbie, was just kind of like a storyboard matrix. And if you have triggers, or you have a problem solution, and then it's like, okay, what story can weave into this based on their persona? And I mean, the whole thing is, the back end is scripted, it is calculated. But I think this is where the art and science comes, is that it's very, when you deliver it, it comes off as a little bit easy breezy. But behind it, this is the problem, this is a solution, inject story, ensure that we hit these words, these emotions, so that you are going to resonate and elicit an emotion that you want in your audience.
100% the truth. This is one of the things I tell people to build, is a story bank. And that story bank allows you to then identify which stories work well in different settings. And so then you can pull them out, just like you said, a storyboard matrix almost, where it's like, if they say this thing, this triggers this story. And there's nothing wrong with having those pre-prepared. The beautiful thing in a story is, you're not going to deliver it the same way every time. It's going to change a little bit. There's going to be a little bit of nuance. You're going to focus on the person you're speaking to. And again, this will come back to storytelling. You should be watching the person you're speaking to. What is grabbing their attention? What are they resonating the most with? Start figuring out, like, where you dig in more. Maybe they're more on, like, the humor side. So you can see them kind of going with you. So you dig into the humor part of the story a little bit more. Or maybe they care more about those high stakes that you're trying to overcome. Dig in more there, create that drama, basically just keep getting deeper and deeper and setting that hook in. So if you can read the person you're speaking to, you can figure out which way to even move inside of your story. So you almost have a story matrix inside of your story matrix, if you will, like if we get super meta. And that's kind of the fun part of being a salesperson is you are doing things on the fly, having to adjust and having to make the right decision to connect at the highest and deepest level with your prospect.
And how much fun is that when you can do that? I think about what came to mind there is the freedom to adjust or adapt real time and really just it's almost like you're looking at it from a from a 30,000 view as if it's almost not you and you think, okay, they laughed there, I'm going to just tap into that a little bit more, or you know what, that didn't land. It's like a comedian, like, did my joke land? But what comes to me there, Robbie, is a framework. And if you don't have some form of framework, you don't have the freedom to do that because you're looking where that next step is, and you're too concentrated on the roadmap versus the freedom to dance in the moment and be like and enjoy yourself and actually feel what they're giving back to you. And then you can go back and forth. But I just think you don't have the freedom to truly connect, share some of your stories, and be in the moment if you don't know where you're going and have some form of framework.
I love this idea because this is really how I think about speaking as well, is we should always figure out what's our goal that we want to achieve. And by having that, we can basically reverse engineer what we're trying to create. And it gives us this framework to work through that allows us to be flexible and adapt in the moment, which is really, again, where that kind of beautiful piece of really a dance comes out. Like it really is a dance that you're having between the two of you. You're reading them, they're reading you, you're letting it kind of play out. And this is the problem when people are following a script instead of using frameworks and having that confidence in themselves to guide and steer the conversation the way that it needs to go. You don't want somebody feeling like they were part of a script. You want them feeling like they were part of a conversation. And there is such a difference there. And you have to be confident in yourself that it's okay to even mess up. You might mess up in a conversation. You're not going to mess up in a script because you're going to say the script over and over and over again. But that person's going to feel, it just didn't feel real to me. Like something felt off. There was that lack of connection. And that's what we want to build. We want to build that connection because if we know anything about persuasion, if you've studied Cialdini at all, it's all about this connection. People want to feel that connection to you. And that's what leads them to say, I'm going to make the emotional decision to buy. And there's a way that I can logically back it up.
Yes, the limbic and the neurocortex part of the brain, and so often, people sell to the fact that the logical, data driven, the neocortex, and it doesn't buy. And I just think that's what justifies, the decision after the fact, just as you said. Um, the, so you mentioned confidence. And I think confidence plays a huge role in this. And I can just, think about my 24-year-old self when I was selling. I probably wouldn't have been as eloquent and as able to dance in the moment, and probably not as many successes under my belt or stories as I do today. But, so what would you have to say to some of the younger folks coming into sales, and to be able to do this and dance in the moment and have that two-way back and forth to really connect? And then, great things can happen, but a lot of times that's missed. And then you're expecting to take it to the next level. And there is no next level because it's that foundational piece that's really missing. So I totally agree that confidence plays a big, big part of this. So what would you say to those to kind of help increase their confidence to get to the ability to be able to do something like that?
So kind of three parts to this answer. The first part is that you're young and it's okay to make mistakes. And lean into being young, lean into that youth, because the person you're talking to is going to be able to picture themselves as that young person as well. They used to be that person. They're going to give you more breaks because you're younger. So like if you can kind of just, again, sometimes we want to project that we're older, more experienced than we are. But in some ways, youth is an advantage. Like you can play into that. I did it all the time as a trial lawyer when I was young and would go into judges who were, 10, 20, 30 years older than me. I wanted them to kind of look at me as like, almost like their younger son, their younger brother, who they would like try to like wrap their arms around and help. And it helped me out to get good results because I would just use that youth as an advantage. The second piece is in order to grow and see those exponential returns as a salesperson that you want to, you need to make these mistakes early. Better to make them earlier when the stakes are lower than later on in your career, because you've always been using a script and you don't know how to dance. You don't know how to have the conversation. So I think you want to actually lean into making mistakes. One of my favorite things to say is confidence only actually comes once you've been knocked down and realize you can keep getting up and keep moving forward. Otherwise, it's just cockiness. If you've never been punched in the mouth, if you've never failed, you don't have real confidence because you don't realize what that feels like. And the third piece to this answer is practice with other people in non-sales calls. Practice with family and friends, telling stories, doing that dance, having real conversations. Anybody that I work with who used to be a lawyer, when I was teaching and coaching the National Mock Trial team, I would have my students play a game that I called the direct examination game. And the goal was they had to go to a restaurant and bring somebody with them, a friend, and just ask questions for 30 minutes. They were not allowed to say a single statement. It had to be 100% questions. And it was just a way to practice in a very low stakes way. And that way, when they got into a courtroom, it was very natural. The same is true for a salesperson. Practice telling stories at the dinner table, practice having conversations and listening, and then translate that into these sales calls when there is higher stakes, but now you've done it time and time again. So it just feels more comfortable.
Hmm. I really love that. I mean, it's a muscle, right? And I think, to be able to ask impactful, thought provoking questions in a sales role is huge. But just that other piece that I know is missing is the active listening. Because if I'm there for 30 minutes, Robbie, guess what I'm thinking about after question one? What's question two? What's question three? And there's such a missed opportunity there.
If you aren't listening, you are not going to be successful. Like it is that important. And it drives me nuts when I'm working with people or asking them questions or talking to them and they're able to immediately answer what I just said. Because all that signals to me is you didn't actually listen to everything I said. It's okay to take a pause. It's okay to sit back and listen. It's okay to think through your answer. There's actually an interesting stat that we generally give ourselves about 30% of the amount of time in silence that our audience will give us. So we always feel rushed to answer when really the other person would give us so much more time in order to come up with that right thing. If you listen, that's how you
Hmm.
actually are getting this information to help guide you on your route. But what happens is we hear part of what they're saying and we start thinking, what's our answer? So guess what? You missed part of it. And this is if we think about like Chris Voss and his mirroring technique, which is something that I did as a lawyer as well. He loves to mirror the last 1 to 3 words that they say. I love to mirror words that they used in the middle of their answer or the middle of their question. And the reason is I want them to hear that not only was I listening to the last bit of it, but I was listening to the entire thing. And so like I'm trying to signal to them, hey, you said something really interesting there in the middle of that. It was this. Can you go deeper on that for me? And all of a sudden it's like, oh, he was really paying attention. He wasn't thinking of his next question. He was thinking of how he can listen to me and like ask a good follow-up.
And that's the beauty there. It's not the question, it's the follow-up. And I think what we talked about, framework is good, but if you have three questions and you're just going one, two, three, and you're like, oh, that second one, just forget the third. That's the money one right there. And people just don't go there. And I just think there's listening. And then are you hearing what they're saying? Like there's emotion there. And even from the storytelling from the other side, there's a story there that needs to be told. And if you pick up on their cues, they want to tell it.
If you can get people to share their stories with you, it's so golden. I mean, and you can hear it in their voice. Like you can tell there's something. So many times you'll be on that call and you'll feel the tension if you're really paying attention. You'll be like, I'm picking up something there. Can you like what is it? Like what led you to this moment? And all of a sudden it triggers this like, well, it was actually like this event I had back in high school that really kind of like killed my confidence. And that's really why I'm looking for this thing. All of a sudden you've got them to really open up because they now feel safe because you've shown them I'm not just listening to your words, I'm paying attention to how you're saying them. And I want you to feel safe.
I think that this just spells for me coaching. When I do a lot of sales coaching, is just leaning into that curiosity and being like, where is this coming from? Because it's the question behind the question, and it's never the first one. And it's just, and a lot of the times when you can create that safe space, and lean into that, that's exactly what happens. Is there's a high school story, there's a childhood story that's fueled or that's masking what's actually going on today.
I mean, if we think about it, right, like building a story brand is a book that I like quite a bit, obviously around storytelling and branding and how we market and sell things. And there's that idea that there's, right, the external desire, there's the internal desire, and then there's the like philosophical desire. And so many times that story that we're getting into of like the thing that happened to them in high school or the thing that happened to them at their last job, that is like that philosophical thing that if we can actually solve that problem for them, it's an easy no-brainer. I want to buy this thing. But too oftentimes we focus just on external because that's what our script is trying to get out, is the external. We don't get deeper because to get deeper, we need that connection. To get the internal and philosophical, we need that connection between us and that prospect. And the only way we get there is by one, telling our own great stories, and two, listening and asking those great follow-up questions so the other person can share their stories with us. And stories really are this driver because they create oxytocin between us, which is this bonding chemical that when somebody shares with us, we feel that connection between the two of us. And that's why, again, it's just so important to listen and really do this well.
Hmm. So, Robbie, just based on that, think about sales leaders. Maybe a new sales leader is coming in and they're trying to get the trust with their team. And they need to disarm. They need to be vulnerable, and vulnerability does not go hand in hand with sales leadership, unfortunately. So, what would you suggest they do in terms of like sharing a story to show that they're approachable, that there's commonality between them and their team, and to really start forming that relationship? How can they disarm and share some stories to do that?
The thing I'll say on this is use a story of when you were in their shoes and a mentor who helped you to grow into the position you're in now. That is just one of these easy ways of setting yourself up as this trusted mentor and being like, I wouldn't be here without the help of John. Let me tell you about that. When I was in your shoes, I had this sale that came up and I blew it. I blew it and I didn't know what went wrong. And I went to John and I said, John, like I messed up. We should have closed this, and I didn't. And rather than yell and scream at me, John basically helped me to figure out what I'd done wrong and really took me under his wing and said, there's a way to fix this. And the fact that you were willing to ask the question shows me that you're coachable. And coachable people are successful as salespeople. And then that was the beginning of this change in the way I approach sales and how I learned and how I ultimately got to this position. And my goal for all of you here is that one day you're going to be in the same position having this exact same talk with your team, because I want you to become that person that leads them, that gets this role, that continues this chain of helping people get better in this role. That's an easy kind of example, and I've used that. I've had other salespeople that I've trained use that. I've had engineers use that. It works across the board. It's just a beautiful way of setting up that, like, I was in your shoes, somebody helped me, I can be that person that can now help you so that people will get that buy-in and trust with you.
That's fantastic. I love the empathy piece there, but it's just that before and after. And I think allowing yourself to go to that before stage and really show your weaknesses, that you weren't always where you are today. But that journey to get there is what you're asking of them. So a lot of times in leadership, I say you can't ask something of your team that you aren't willing yourself to do or to go through it. And that story just there showed that I was vulnerable. I struggled too. I'm, connecting with you because you're on that same place, but I found the answer through this. And then that's my solution to you. So there's a mirroring and a parallel there as well.
We're using a lot of like hero's journey type stuff there, which is just this
Yes.
very tried and true formula. And there's a reason, like, you as the sales leader don't want to be the hero of the story. You want to be the Obi-Wan, the Yoda to your salespeople so that they feel they can come and trust you. But you, in order to set yourself up as that, you have to show your own struggle. You have to show how you overcame it. And if you can essentially tie that into a mentor, a trusted figure, help me get there, that allows you to set yourself up as a trusted mentor and use that example. It becomes pattern recognition for your salespeople, because they say, I've seen this pattern before. Oh, John talked about it. He used to be here. This is what he did when he failed. He had somebody who helped him. Well, I need to do the same thing. And there's this misbelief that we don't want to share our struggles, that we want to be projecting out that we've always been successful. We've always done it the right way, but that's really unrelatable. And so you're not going to be attracting people to come and ask you for help if they feel like they always have to be successful. it becomes this barrier. You essentially put up this wall, this shield between you, because most people don't feel that way. And the ones that do probably are just really cocky, and you don't want to be dealing with them anyways. So if we can show our struggles, but the key is show struggles that you overcame. Do not just show failures and be like, I failed. Like we need a finish there. Like I failed, but I changed it and got better as a result. That's really where the magic happens, is showing how you overcame that obstacle.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I think even in the sales, when there's that, resonance, how can you share a story have a similar customer started in that same thought process, that same denial phase, and how you help them, get the awareness through asking questions, sharing insights that brought them to where you are today. I think that meeting them where they're at, going like, you're not alone here. And I do this all the time, but it's true. Most people I talk to, they're not in buy mode, right? So how do you tell a story to get them to thinking differently? And I love what you said about relatable. We have to be relatable. So when we're leading with our perfections, like, they know that perfect doesn't exist. And there's this book here. Todd Capone wrote The Transparency Sale, and he has a term that he used as flawsome, and leading with your flaws, because you disarm your audience. And we know perfection doesn't exist. And it makes you unrelatable, that it's like, if this is what you have, like, we're not interested.
It's and this is a little bit different because this is more around speaking, but I think the point will stand and make a lot of sense. Winston Churchill, when he would write his speeches, so he's known as one of the world's greatest orators of all time. And when he would write his speeches, he would purposely write in mistakes, and he would purposely write in moments where he would take big pauses to act like he had just come up with an idea in the moment. This intentionality behind appearing imperfect is just like a demonstration on the extreme of why flaws are so important. Because what he found earlier, when he'd be too perfect, he wouldn't get any buy-in because people didn't feel like he was relatable. So even myself, oftentimes as a speaker, will think through in big moments, how can I make sure I make a few mistakes so it doesn't feel like it's just too polished, too polished, too polished.
Mhm.
And that works in real life as well. When we're just on a call, like I'm not the best. Like I've made mistakes, I've failed. Like one of my favorite stories to talk about is my 8th jury trial that I lost. Like it is one of my favorite stories to tell, and I tell about a trial I lost that I should have won, that everything was stacked in my favor. I was ready to celebrate, and I lost. Like, and I love telling the story, which seems so strange. Like, Robbie, why are you talking about a case you lost when I won far more than I ever lost? Because the lesson there is so powerful. And I need people to see I'm not perfect. I made mistakes. There's a reason why I learned all this stuff. It was because I got punched in the mouth and lost because I was basically burying my head in the sand and not doing it the right way. But once I figured that out, things changed. This is that transformation journey and that transformation story using kind of this origin piece that we want to be able to play into.
That's great. And I think the self-awareness piece there as well is to just like, obviously learning the lesson, but then like building something bigger than that, that's going to prevent you from making the same lesson, but also now creating a business that's going to, I'm sure a business idea also came from that allows you to help so many people. So we always say celebrate the failures, because there's feedback and there's a message in it if you can celebrate it. If you can, a lot of people, they bury their head in shame.
I came across this last night, and I was reading a LinkedIn post. Somebody I don't know. It was a founder in the technology space, and he was announcing that after 5 years of work on his company, he had to come to the decision to shut it down. It wasn't profitable. It wasn't making money. He had to end it. He's like, I feel like a failure. Like I failed. I had this goal and I didn't achieve it. But the interesting thing is, by him sharing this story, and obviously he said thanks to everybody who supported him and talked about the journey a little bit. In the comment section, there were probably 50 comments. And at least the ones that I read through, I saw 15 job offers or introductions to job offers, purely because he's willing to lean into, I failed. I tried to do something and I was unsuccessful. And there's no doubt he's going to be successful now because he's got all these job opportunities. Like Nestle reached out to him about a job opportunity. Like he's getting huge interest from people purely because he was willing to share his flaws and share his faults. It's so powerful. We should be leaning into that and showing essentially that we fail, but we don't give up. We keep pushing forward. That's that kind of magic where people just resonate with us because we all love the story of the underdog, right? We've all seen that failure. We've all seen that moment. Those are the stories we love. Those are the stories we watch time and time again.
Be the Rudy.
Rudy is a classic example. I mean, even think about Michael Jordan's story. Michael Jordan's story.
Yeah.
How many times have you heard it? Was cut from his high school basketball team. Was cut from his high school basketball team. Like that is the driving thing behind the Michael Jordan story is cut from his high school basketball team. Mm-hmm. Nobody thinks less of Michael Jordan because he didn't make his high school basketball team. In fact, they think more of him because he overcame that.
Yeah. Well, I think the message there is resiliency. It's like, yes, I failed, but I'm hungrier now than ever before because of that failure. And I'll do whatever it takes.
And as a salesperson, you can be using all these moments too. Past things when you failed and overcome them, or when clients have failed and you've helped them overcome them. Like there are so many examples that you can pull from to really resonate and connect with the person that you're speaking to.
Mm-hmm. I think just when you said that, I think about, stories, from a company standpoint, like you said, is, if they're saying you're all the same or they're kind of generalizing you, there's an opportunity there to say, yeah, I can see how you can say that. But then you take them, you either, kind of zoom in or zoom out and take them, show them a different perspective, get them thinking, yes, that's where most people think, but point out details or something that's completely different that they weren't aware of, and do that through storytelling. And I think a lot of people, they when they don't do that, well, we're the number one in this, and did you know this? And it's like they get defensive, and all it does is push your audience to tighten their grip on whatever state they're in. But I think if you can draw them out a little bit through stories and share examples and analogies, they're like, oh, I didn't know that. So you've educated them, but you've also diffused the situation because you're playing around with emotion.
It reminds me of when Jeff Bezos said, if the data and the stories don't align, you have a problem with the data. And I think salespeople so oftentimes forget the stories are the ones that drive people. And we will send, just like you said, we're the number one this. We've done X number of sales. This many people work with us. But the truth is, and to go like on the other extreme, this is a little bit dark, but like it comes from Stalin when he said like one death is a tragedy, 45 million deaths is just a number. And it's the truth. Like there's a reason why we want to tell like real life stories. And it's the reason, for instance, like Anne Frank's diary has been so impactful as a book. It's telling the real life story of somebody going through the Holocaust instead of just the Holocaust as this huge number. And these stories are extremely, extremely powerful. The same with Malala. The way that she tells her story about what happened to her at the hands of the Taliban is far more impactful than when we just hear numbers of what's going on in Afghanistan. Stories are what drive and connect us. So if you can do some of that instead of being like, here's our feature, here's our feature, here's our feature, here's our numbers, here's our numbers, here's our numbers, here's a story. Even if it's just one person, that one person story is so much more powerful than saying we've worked with 3,000 people. 3,000 people is a number. One story is a real person that I can connect to. And I can say, oh, that sounds a little bit like me. Yeah, that's the same struggle I'm going through. That's the same thought I have. Maybe these people can solve my problem, right? Like that's the difference is you allow me to now put myself in that person's shoes. I can't put myself in 3,000 people's shoes because I know that not all of them are like me.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I just think, from a leadership standpoint, when they're doing some form of sales training, like they have to have an element of the storytelling built in, because I do a lot of call coaching now and I'll hear them and they'll say, we're this, and all those three stats they're good and they're differentiators. But I just said, if you had those embedded in the story and you played it at the right time, because otherwise you're grandstanding. And it's like, of course, I'm going to say how great we are. I work for the company. What if you put it in a story and you shared it from the customer standpoint, that they're saying this instead of we're the leading, and I just think there's so much, stories sell, facts tell, right? And you can see how they're just not, oh, here's a typical salesperson saying how good they are. They forget they're on a sales call because you are conversational and you're telling a story that's got benefits, that's got objections built into it. So it's everything all in one.
It's also an interesting way to disarm somebody right away. We're like, I'm sure you've been on a lot of these. I could tell you how great we are and all the numbers and all that sort of stuff, but I just really want to learn more about you today. What's going on with you, Karen? Like, what's the problem that you're facing? And like I've given you this like cue of, yeah, we've got a lot of awesome stuff. And it's planted a seed where at some point you may get to a position where you like our conversation enough. You're like, hey Robbie, you said something at the beginning, like that you have all these stats and these awards. Can you tell me more about those now? But like instead of me just coming and being like, we're the number one this, we've got X number of people work with us, boom, 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 where it feels like I'm just posturing. Now it's like I've planted a seed saying like we've got all this stuff, but I don't want to talk about that today. What's going on with you, Karen? Like how are you feeling? What's your problem? It's become about you. It's become a conversation, and at some point, if you like the way it's going, you're going to ask me to brag about our company, and then it's something you want to hear instead of something I want to tell.
Yeah. Well, I think of so many things I just wrote down there. One is a reciprocity there, right? If you're going to share, I'm going to happy to share after. One thing I've noticed just throughout our whole conversation is also tonality, and that your tone is very non-threatening and it's very inviting. So I'm sure you're aware of that. It's a differentiator and something that we want to consider when we're speaking. But tonality is a big thing, but also the other person's perspective, the OPP. And I always, anytime I'm myself, if I'm having a discovery call or I'm coaching something, it's just like, just tap into their mind for 1 minute. So when they get on this call, what are they thinking? What are they feeling? What are their hopes? What are their fears? Because they're probably thinking, holy cow, another salesperson, they're going to try to sell me something. But think about what you just said there in that opening of, you know what, you probably, I could tell you how great we are, but what I'd rather do is hear a little bit about more about you. Right away you've tapped in their brain and they're thinking, holy cow, this guy understands me. He must, he's in tune with what I'm thinking. But you took 2 or 3 minutes before you got on the call just to consider their feelings, their thoughts, because your messaging then is so tailored to your audience and you truly are others focused.
It just makes such a huge difference if you can go into that call immediately and disarm and invite them to share
Yeah.
with you. And again, people love hearing the sound of their own voice. People love to talk. And so if you
Hmm.
can make them feel safe in that moment, now they're going to enjoy the conversation a lot more. The problem is when you get on a lot of these sales calls, because you go into attack mode right out of the gate, people don't want to hear their own voice because they feel like they're under attack and they're threatened. And when you get threatened, you get backed into a corner. And so you're trying to find like the easiest way to be safe instead of disarming and not going on the attack, but just being like, not like just really curious to learn more about you, Karen. It becomes a very different type of conversation. And around tonality, the interesting thing is I have a very like lawyer tonality as well if I want to. And occasionally it will come out when I'm in certain conversations. And I've had friends before who I'm in very kind of heated discussions and maybe we were considering working together and there's like some issue. It'll be like, Robbie, you're in like, I can tell you're in lawyer mode and I've got to pull out. And what you'll find is you can really develop different tones for the right settings. You can speak different languages, if you will, in terms of like who you're speaking to and how you approach them. And yes, when you're on a sales call, you need to be friendly. You need to be inviting. It needs to be easy for somebody to open up to you. It should be super non-threatening, and you have to practice that. And so this is, I'm sure, something that you coach people on. I would imagine is watch game tape, watch yourself
Mm.
on podcasts, on sales calls, on different appearances, so you can see how do I sound, how is my body language, how is the intonation, and is my tone changing in the right moments? Am I taking pauses at the right moment to let somebody really consider something? Am I rushing them or am I letting them really kind of process and come up with the right answer? Just like a professional basketball, baseball, soccer player does, watch stuff back and then really take a harsh look at yourself. Are you doing the right things at the right time? Yes or no? And it's okay if it's no, just fix it.
Hmm. A game tape is a huge part of my job, and game tape doesn't lie. So, what I suggest is a few things. One is watch it with the volume off so you can really see your body language and your hand gestures. And another one is look at your audience, because looking at your tonality is one thing, but sometimes you see people take go back, or you're like, oh, I was a little bit too, I was interrogating there versus conversational. So I think it's really, really important to, and yeah, you might see something you don't like, but say thank you because now I'm aware. I wasn't aware that I was doing that. And not enough people do that. I just think look at your Zoom calls, record them. Anything. Even when I'm preparing for a keynote, like I practice, I tape myself, I look at things. It's the small nuances. What do you do when you're nervous? You're touching your hair, all these things that are distracting your audience from the message you're trying to, leave with them and part with them.
It just pays to look at it and see what you do well and what you don't do well. And it reminds me, when I was a trial lawyer, I'd ask every jury at the end of them, I'd go back and talk to them and say, I want to know the brutal, harsh truth. What didn't you like? What did I do that didn't make sense? What turned you off from things that I was saying? Like, I want all the bad stuff. That I rarely ask for good stuff. I mean, they would give it because they wanted to be nice, but I wanted the tough love, because that's how I would improve. And those people were vicious, because I just basically dragged them out of their lives for a week trial that they didn't want to be a part of. And they held nothing back at me. But it was so impactful because I learned what I was doing that did not resonate with those people, and I could fix it and I could change it. And one of those things early on was I was very loud. I like to be loud over the top. And they kept telling me, that doesn't work for you. It feels like we were under attack. And so I completely changed the way that I approached it. I wouldn't have if I wouldn't have gotten that feedback from those people. So you can do the same when you're watching. And just like you said, I love that with the volume off. I think that's super smart to see just body language, the other person, and like even hand gestures, right? I mean, there's like subtle things. Are your hands open or are they closed, right? Closed is a sign of danger. Open is a sign of safety. Because as humans, we're looking for that. We're looking, do they have a weapon in their hand? Yes or no. So if you can see my hand, see my palms, that's why you'll see a lot of flashing like that when I'm speaking, just to make the other person feel safe.
Yeah, huge. One thing we talked about a bit is pausing, and I stress this so much that 3 to 5 seconds in our head is nothing. And even in technology, there's usually a delay just with the tech itself. But I think pausing sometimes, it's the first time your audience has heard what you've said. So allow them to just digest it because you just shared whatever, and then you're asking them to do something about it. And it's like, hang on a minute. And usually that ask, there's three asks in it. So they're just like, I don't even know what this is. Now you want me to do what with it? And then there's a group, it's a panel, and nobody, you think about ego, and they're like, and then the cameras go off or something. So I just think, pause and just allow it to digest. If you're not getting the answer or the response you want, break it down. Give them an example. And in the game tape, I so often see, so that's $10,000. And nobody says anything. So it's like, well, if you look at your team of 10, you're looking at, $1,000 a person. And, based on the national training average, this is well, but like, don't just leave it at that. Like, I just think pause, but then, give them time to answer, and also pause just to go, even, if someone's asked you a question, but like, I know I'm going to answer, but I got to think about my audience now. Like, how can I best position this just versus just going boom and answering right away? Like, pausing is your friend, but so many people are afraid of silence.
They really are. They really are. And it's such a powerful, powerful tool to get somebody to think through what you just said, to be able to process. I mean, if we think about it, when you read something, how many times have you read something and you hit something really interesting and you go, huh, that's really interesting. And like, you literally take this pause to yourself to think, huh, that's interesting, because it hits you, like the saying is, hit me like a ton of bricks, right? The same is true when we speak, but sometimes we forget that like they can't get that moment of, huh, that is really interesting, if we don't give them that freedom to be in that silence and really go through that process. And us as the salesperson, we should know, what are the big moments? What are the things that we think will make them sit there and go, huh, that's really interesting. That's a good point. I hadn't thought of it like that. We should know what those moments are going to be and basically set them up so that when we deliver them, we then sit back and take that pause and really take the pause. Be very, very comfortable. Don't fidget. Just lean into it. There's nothing wrong with being in silence. It is so powerful. So I really do love what you said. I cannot encourage that enough or echo what you just said. Use silence, use the pause as your friend, and just get comfortable and then read it. You'll learn how to read those signs. So like when you're in the silence, don't just zone out. This is another trap that a lot of people will make. They go into silence and they just zone out because they're trying to distract themselves from the discomfort they're feeling. Instead, lean into that, sit there in that discomfort and start reading the person on the other side. See how their body language is. Did it tense up? Did it open up? Can you see that their eyes went up into their head so they're thinking through, right? Like it's a clear sign that we know that person is processing what we just said. Are they leaning in? Maybe they want a little bit more. Maybe they lean back. Little cues like this can give us a lot of insight into what our next question or our next point should be from that silence. But because people are uncomfortable, they miss all of those cues and then they jump in the wrong way. And now you have essentially shattered this kind of connection that you've been building.
Yeah, and it's all based on connection. And that's so true that they just they can't handle the discomfort. And I think, the more you do it and the more you're picking up on these nuances and looking at what they're doing, the more comfortable you're going to get. And you're going to be like, okay, that wasn't as bad because look at what I learned from them. And then you can almost anticipate them. So when I ask this question to this persona, they're not used to asking this is what happens. And it becomes a little bit more predictive in future conversations.
If you do that right, it even opens up, hey, Karen, I'm picking up something right there. And it's something I've seen with a lot of people I've talked to about this. And oftentimes the question they have for me is this: is that kind of what's going through your mind? If you do that, you've now basically framed what the question is that they should have in their mind. They're probably either thinking that or too uncomfortable to say otherwise. So if they say, yes, that is, now you get to talk about this question that moves the ball forward with this type of avatar, this type of prospect. And so simply by saying, I pick up on this, and this is something I get from a lot of people I talk to, and this is normally their question. It's made it very safe for you to be like, yeah, that's my question too, because now we've grounded it in other people ask this. Let me go into that for you. And now you've basically guided the conversation without the other person feel like you're guiding the conversation.
That's an art. That's magic. And I think a few things there, Robbie, is one, you're attentive. So you're picking up on that without them feeling, they have to raise their hand and kind of say that you're attentive to the conversation, that you picked up that. And I always feel that their thought is, if you understand me, therefore you must be able to help me.
The sooner you can demonstrate, the way you demonstrate that you're an expert is not by listing all the features, not by listing all the things you've done. It's by speaking something deep inside of that prospect, that person, that they're like, I didn't share this with this person, but they just nailed it. Like they understand me better than I understood myself coming into this call. And the moment you hit that is the moment that like you've got them.
Yeah, and I think someone that's very in tune with their own emotions, because if you're not in tune to your own and understand, lean into your own curiosity, like where is this feeling coming? Why am I feeling anxious? Why am I feeling tense? You can't recognize it in others.
I think it definitely helps. One interesting thing to think of when you're a salesperson is, how do you feel on sales calls when like you're on the other end? So I actually think this is one of those things a lot of people forget, is how much they can learn by being sold to. And it's helpful to remember how you feel in those moments. When you are selling, you're going to feel a little bit differently probably than your other person, because you feel stressed and anxious over closing the deal or asking the right question or whatever it is. Whereas the other person feels nervous and anxious because they're being sold to. And so there's a little bit of a distinction there. But I think if we can lean into some of this idea of calling out, how we feel internally to ourselves and making sure that's not interrupting the way that we're presenting externally, you can really start to dial those in. And I'll say this: people will come to me a lot. Like I get nervous, right? Whenever I speak on stage, I'm nervous. Or whenever I speak on a call, I'm nervous. Whenever I'm on Zoom, I'm nervous, whatever it is. I actually have a slightly different opinion of that. It's just energy. And we can basically name it excitement. We can name it nerves. If you name it nerves, guess what? You're going to feel nervous. If you name it excitement, you're going to feel more excited. Like if a soccer player gets up to the line to give a penalty kick, there's actually, during the Euros, is very interesting. One of the soccer commentators was saying this. His coach would walk up to the players and just look in their eyes before he would designate who was going to take the PKs in the final penalty kick shootout to see who would win the game, because he could tell in their eyes how they were feeling in that moment. The interesting thing is that moment is exactly the same for all 11 players on the pitch. There's no different, but some are feeling that energy as nerves. Some are feeling the energy as excitement. How we define it is really what affects us. So if we can think about going into these moments of, I'm going to feel that internally, because you are, like, I feel it every time I talk, like that rush in the stomach, the fingers, the throbbing in the head, like it's natural. But how we tell ourselves internally we're feeling To me, it's always like, hey, this means I get to do something exciting, something cool. I have an opportunity to succeed. And then I can lean into that and use that to my benefit instead of letting it pull me back to my detriment.
Yeah, I love that. And I mean, I wake up every morning, I say, I get to do this, not I have to do this. And I think language plays such an important role. And a similar story to yours, as there was an Olympic athlete, and they were the CNN person was asking them questions, and they said, "Oh, you must be so nervous." And every one of them said, "I'm so excited." And they did a backstory, and it was physiologically nervousness and anxiety produce the same output in your body, but it's what you tell yourself or call it. Because you're right, if I say I'm nervous, guess what? You've just asked for that to happen. So I think you have to just language is so important. But I think also when people ask me, are you nervous? And yes, I think if you didn't have a bit of butterflies, like you wouldn't be human. And I think that's natural, that's healthy. But a lot of times I think, well, I'm not so nervous because if I'm really nervous, I'm thinking about the wrong person. And my job is to create a transformative experience for my audience. So I'm thinking about them. I'm thinking about what do they want to get out of here today. And I just really shift my focus that I'm not thinking about hair, makeup, all these superficial things. I'm thinking, how can I really create an experience? How can I, like I always do the KFD, what do I want them to know, feel, and do? And if I'm so inwardly focused, I am not going to be able to accomplish my goal.
That's the right approach. Unfortunately, that's not the approach a lot of people take because it's all internal. It's I've got to give the best speech. I've got to make the right thing happen. I've got to say it in the right way. And by focusing all internally, we're forgetting that the entire job as a salesperson, as somebody who's speaking to another person, is how does that other person feel? What happens to the other? It should always be about our listener, about our prospect, about our audience. It. I never cared as a trial lawyer if I thought my speech was great. If my closing argument, I sat down and said that was the greatest closing argument I ever gave, and then the jury came back and gave me a verdict that was the opposite of what I wanted, guess what? It wasn't the greatest closing argument I'd ever given. And there were times I'd sit down and be like, I didn't really love that one, but the jury loved it. And they then acted in the way that I wanted them to. Guess what? By focusing on me, I had the wrong focus. By focusing on my audience, that really changed everything. So it started to get into this mindset for me of everything's about them. Like the way I judge my success is, yeah, like I want it to sound good and I can listen, I can break down whether I did things right or wrong and things I could have improved on and all that. But at the end of the day, if my audience was inspired to take action, the action that I want them to take, I was successful. And it really takes on this. I always ask the question, where's my audience at and where do I want them to end up at? And how do I build that bridge to walk them across? Same as kind of what you're saying, the know, feel, and do. It's the same idea. And I'm always trying to get in the mind of who's my audience, who am I talking to, even on a podcast, right? Like I'm thinking, Karen, about you. I'm thinking about your audience. What are they going to want to hear? It isn't about me delivering just things that I think sound cool. It's how can we help them when they listen to actually take action from what they're hearing? It doesn't matter where you are, panel appearance, one-on-one call for a sale, a big group selling from the stage. It is all the same stuff. Think about your audience, get in their head, and deliver value to them. If you deliver value to them, good things happen.
I wasn't, earlier in my career, I wouldn't have thought this way. It's only through years of experience that I've become others focused, but I see the complete difference. And I see other people that get up there still on their first slide is the company, the different locations and the all the logos. And it's like, that is, who cares? Like nobody cares. That actually just turns them away, even if you have the best product. So I just think when you can lead with others and in service, it just serves you so much better.
It really is just the worst way to start anything is just with that bolstering mindset. Instead, build like this is why I love, again, going back to what we've been talking so much about storytelling. Storytelling allows you to brag without bragging. It is the easiest way to build
Hmm.
credibility without the listener feeling like you're just throwing things at them because it's entertaining and engaging. You get to show off without them being like, oh, this person's just showing off all their cool awards. You can talk about winning awards in a story, which is very different than being like, I've won this award, I've won this award, I've won this award. And now they're going to be engaged and like be rooting for you winning these awards because you told it in a story instead of just a list.
So true, so true. So the brag without bragging, and I would completely agree with that. So, Robbie, if people are listening to this right now and they were of the mindset, and I say were because they're about to change now, of leading with themselves and their product, and they want to really get that emotional connection and start really connecting with their audience in order to move them, how would you suggest they start incorporating storytelling into their customer interactions?
So I wouldn't dive directly into when you first get on a call, right? We need to get some buy-in from the person we're speaking to. So again, make it about the other person first. When you want to use your stories in this way is when the person you're speaking to has triggered something where it's like the story can help them understand something at a better level. It helps me explain something to them, but in a way that's non-threatening and engaging to them. So like you've got to do enough of that early on rapport building, right? Which is so important as a salesperson. Get on a call and talk to these people and find out things about them, right? Have that interesting conversation, ask them the right questions, get them to open up, disarm by being like, I could tell you about like all the words and stuff, but like that's not what we're here for today. I just want to know more about you today, Karen. And then start going into that and say, you know what, 3, 4 answers later, maybe you say something like, that actually reminds me of this really interesting story. We were working with this client and they were facing a very similar problem to you. And then you basically lay out this story and you talk them through it and you show the customer transformation as they go from where you currently are to ultimately where you want to be. And you're essentially walking them through that story. Now you've bought enough goodwill because you've asked enough questions where you on the other side are going to say, yeah, that story makes sense because it relates to the things we've just been talking about. They have enough information about me. I'm willing to listen to them. And oh, that's really engaging. Maybe that is me. And now we've started to really move forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. So you're the bridge to take them from where they are and where they want to be through storytelling. And I think relating it back to just what they shared prior to this call, but even in that opening on the call is very important because it just shows, I hear you. I'm tying it back and I'm tailoring it based on what you said. So it's not just this generic solution; it's really tailored and catered to your unique need. And the trigger, I think the trigger is, exactly like, and you just think, how is the best way to show my solution here based on the trigger you just, I got the green light here. How am I going to show it? And if I just get a brochure and start reading it versus building the story, like I have just such a better chance of moving the deal along.
And there's easy ways to transition into that, right? It's, oh, Karen, that actually really reminds me of like this time that this happened, right? This reminds me, or brings to mind the story that I love to share with you. And you can even almost like get permission from them if you're doing it early. You could almost do, Karen, I'd love to share a story that I think will really resonate on that point you just made. You're gonna be like, sure, Robbie, that sounds great. And now I've got like, so if you're less comfortable just with that transition into the story, you can almost build in permission from them to say, yeah, I'd love to hear that story. So you've got to figure out where you are. As you get more advanced and more comfortable, you just know how to transition into them and make them really engaging and appealing. And people will want to hear more of them because you get really good at telling them. But early on, I think one of the best examples I love of what I call a lateral transition is Joe Rogan does this really, really well. If you watch how he starts almost every interview, it's like talking about either their energy, he loves their energy, or he's talking about how he loves the work they're doing. But what he'll do is he'll use that to move laterally and then go deep into what he actually wants to talk about. And he finds a way to basically build that bridge between what he starts with, that rapport building, into the actual topic he wants to dig into. And then everything just kind of flows from there. It's a really easy way to think about it. And stories, what you're trying to do is laterally transition into that story so you can dig in and really start moving in that vertical that you want to get to the sale.
I think that's great. Then that's where again that intentionality, but just understanding your customer or the type of customer going into it. Because so often, even in a presentation, it's just a hard left, and you're just like, oh, there's no connection there, and you've lost them. And then it brings it back to that was all me focused. So I think a nice segue, even like, how does this talk to each other? Like, you're missing a part there, whether it's even in speaking, but even in emails or something. It's like that point 1 to 3, you need to soften it with a 2 in there.
There's got to be a transition and it's got to make sense. And I will say, honestly, I think that that's one of the hardest parts of any sales call is figuring out that transition that makes sense, that makes people feel easy. Because so many people just, hey, Karen, how are you today? Oh, where are you calling in from? Great. How's everything been for you? Oh, really good. Well, I want to talk to you today about the product that we're offering. And you're just like, oh, whoa, Like, where do we go from talking? And there's easy ways to transition there, right? Let's say you have a product that is super helpful for people because like COVID opened up new markets. You could simply ask the question of like, hey, Karen, how has COVID kind of been affecting like where you've been living? How are things there these days? You talk about, oh, things are opening up, but like we're definitely not going back to the old ways things used to be. Karen, that's a great point. It actually brings me to what I want to talk to you about today, because I think we've really got something that makes sense now in this new COVID world that can help you. You've made this transition in a way that feels very natural because you were talking about this one thing in your personal life. And you're like, that actually takes us to what I want to talk about because it relates back to COVID and how it's changed the world.
And you have to set that up. That's kind of the reverse engineering talking. So it does feel natural. Even another, what I always say, the reason I'm asking this, or the reason I say that, just to give them that context behind them, is showing where I'm coming from and where I want to take you. Because I think nobody likes surprises. So if I can just kind of show you up front where this question is going, I'm indirectly getting buy-in to allow you to come with me.
The more that we can get those like subtle yeses, permissions, right? And I think if anyone is familiar, which probably most people are, with Chris Voss's work from Never Split the Difference, one of his big things is the moment you can get somebody to say that's right, that's when everything has turned in your favor.
Yeah, versus the you're right. And just about the yeses. So what about the no's? Because I know he's always what you want to go for the no's and allows people to feel safe. What are your thoughts on going for the no?
So I do want people to give me no's. I want real information. I think that is just, it's valuable. And it's easier then to show that, again, if we're thinking through connection and building that, we're not here just to get them just to say yes all the time. If they say no, that's great. Now I get to show a way that I'm listening and moving the conversation in a way that doesn't feel scripted. Again, most people are going to be thrown by a no where it's like, well, that doesn't fit my script. And if you can find a way to be like, I totally get that, Karen. You say that this doesn't seem like a great fit for you right now. What would change that? Like, what would you be thinking would be the right timing for this to be a great fit for you? Now we've moved the conversation into you've got to project out and say like when it's going to be a great fit for you. If you do that, you're going to give me more information, which then I may be able to say, and so like, what is kind of preventing you from being at that point right now? Now you're going to talk about that more. What it may actually end up doing is opening up an avenue to show you that what you actually need is the thing that I'm selling you if you want to get to the point. Like that's actually the missing ingredient. So even though you said, it's not really a good time for me, I've now walked you through this process where I can show you it actually is a good time, but it's because I listened to your no, took it in a way to continue to dig in and find more information, and then I can show you how I can help you.
I go for the no's because just what you said there, they've opened up, they've shared more about their position, their background, how they make decisions that you didn't know before. Maybe they were closed. That, as you said, this is a great, now my solution or my story can come in and tie to this, but I didn't even know that before this. I think the reason we don't is we can't detach from the outcome, and we're too, we got to get the yes, we got to get the win. It's like if you detach from that and just are in the moment and you're mindful and you're asking good questions and they say no, my blood doesn't boil. I'm like, oh, interesting. Like, like I want to know why, because maybe there's a misunderstanding. Maybe we are not a good fit. I also think salespeople need to understand we can't work for everybody. But all this is telling me is there's more here. The plot thickens. What is it that's going on here? Tell me. Maybe this is actually going to expedite our working together. Maybe it's not. But as you said, like, don't be fearful about that. That is feedback. I would rather have that than nothing.
I think of going into sales calls very much along the lines of trying to figure out why we shouldn't work together. Because then I'm not attached to the outcome. In fact, the outcome I'm trying to get to is, no, it's not a good fit. Because then if they answer everything in a way where it's like, it clearly is a good fit, I haven't been trying to get to that answer. I've actually been trying to be like, oh, you're too early. You don't have the right resources. I can't deliver like the amount of outcome that I want for you. But like, if they keep giving me answers where I'm like, no, like okay, they do have the resources. They are at the right time. I can help them to the degree I want to. All of a sudden it becomes a lot easier to be like, hey, I can help you. And here's what that would look like. And not only that, this attachment to the outcome, the problem is, if you've ever been in a negotiation, you know this. The person who wins the negotiation is the one with the least to lose, the one who's willing to walk away from the table. So if you come into a sale and you're like, I've got to land the sale, you have the most to lose. So you're going to be the most pushy. You're going to be the one who feels needy. You're going to be the one who doesn't come across as like, hey, like I'm just trying to help you. If you want it, great. If you don't, I'll go and help somebody else who does. Like that ability to say, I can walk away from this and I'm going to be totally fine is an absolute game changer for a salesperson, because that mindset really changes. And the person on the other side picks up on that tonality, picks up on that body language, picks up on the way that you're presenting it as, maybe I need to sell myself that they should want to work with me. And that shift can be super, super powerful.
Yeah, well, you're not desperate, right? And I think when you, as a salesperson, if you have a good pipeline, that addresses all of that. But yeah, I just think, and so one thing I always say is, we're not for everybody, and even just that disqualification, letting you know, like, I don't work with everybody. Like, it's got to be a good fit, like morally and value wise. Like, we have to align. I'm not going to sell my soul to the devil for a gig. So I think doing that absolutely, and letting them sell themselves to you as to why, get them asking, like, because then when you say, well, I think we can work together. I think I can help you. Think about the sales cycle. Boom, it compresses and you're ready to sign.
Yep. I think you're spot on there. It's that desperation. People can feel it. And the moment they feel it is the moment that they don't need to work with you. Because the truth is, I wouldn't want to work
Yeah.
with someone who feels desperate, because that means they're not doing a good job at what they're doing. Like if they're desperate for a sale, they must not have enough people interested, which means I don't want to work with that person. I want to work with someone who's an expert, who's elite at what they do, who like it's hard for me to get into them. It's that premium product. It's that premium
Yeah.
pricing. It's that like, the club that has the velvet rope and there's a line. Like I don't want to go to the one that's empty with like, tons of space. I want to go to the one where like all the people are lining up to hang out and like I can just like walk through the door because I'm like, hey, you want me in here.
But then you can charge the premium price when you have that, right? Because you're in demand. Yeah.
100%. And the truth is, selling a premium product is really no different than selling a cheap product. In fact, selling a premium product can be easier because you have better qualified people listening to your sales pitch, listening to your talk, instead of these people who are going to nickel and dime everything.
Hmm. And I think we're going to end on this because we'll keep on opening threads here. But that just leading back to your ideal customer profile, like who are you targeting? And I think when you think about pipeline, I always say it's quality over quantity. Like I can have thousands of people, but they're tire kickers. They're not in my persona of the industry or my sweet spot that I can really help. So it's like, who cares? Who am I kidding at that point? Like you know.
If you try to be for everyone, you end up being for no one, right? That's
Hmm.
true in marketing,
Hmm.
it's true in sales, it's true in anything you do. And
Hmm.
really focusing on who do you want to work with? Who do you deliver the best results to? Who do you enjoy working with? And don't try to force a square into a circle, right? Like, let's just acknowledge who we want to work with, why that's a good fit, and then let's find those people and let's be willing to walk away from the table. Let's not be desperate and let's have real conversations. Get real confident in the way that you have that conversation with people. What you're going to find is if that is your ideal customer profile and you know them really well and you can connect the stories to them, you're going to start finding a ton of really, really positive results because now you're speaking their language and you start to be seen as this trusted figure inside of that space. That's where it really all comes down to. But if you try to do it for everyone, now you're just speaking to a general audience. But if you can speak very specifically to that ideal customer profile, it resonates with them on a deep psychological level. Again, if I'm in Texas, I'm using y'all a whole lot more than I am anywhere else in the country because in Texas, y'all is an easy way for me to build connection and say, I'm one of you. You can trust me. I speak your language.
Hmm. Yeah, language is important, and the riches are in the niches. But I think people get fearful of that because it's that abundant versus scarcity mindset, and it's like what? It's not scarcity, but it's focused. And like you said, the language. If you can get their internal language, their jargon, their acronyms, again, she understands me, therefore she's able to help me.
Exactly right.
Well, Robbie, you've been unbelievable, sharing a lot of tactical, information from storytelling to, going for the no, tonality, really pausing, all these amazing things that we all need as salespeople and sales leaders, especially in the virtual world. If people want to learn more about you, where's the best way for them to find you and perhaps connect with you?
Easiest ways are really social media is the best way. So you can follow me both LinkedIn and Instagram is at the Robbie Crab, ROBBIECRAB. And then on Twitter, it's just at Robbie Crab because Twitter won't let me have the extra the there. those are the easiest ways. DMs are open. Anyone can talk to me. I have an email list. I can get you on that if you want to. Have a website where I write a lot, and then also have courses and programs that I run to help people around this sort of stuff. So if anyone's interested in that, always happy to talk about that. Again, see if you're a good fit. I'll tell you if you're not. But follow me on socials where I give a lot of information away and just want to continue to help people.
Excellent. Well, those will all be included in the show notes. So, Robbie, thanks again for your time today and imparting so much knowledge and wisdom to our audience. I know that there'll be a lot of game changing moments after this. So, thank you again.
Thanks so much, Karen. This was great.